Today, I'll show you exactly how we built this incredible terrain piece, one that any Middle-earth fan will undoubtedly recognize. Our version of Helm's Deep is clearly inspired by Peter Jackson's visuals, but I did make a few notable changes. You'll see how this model was built, learn how you could build your own, and listen to me pontificate on the reasons I modified Peter Jackson's version. The Two Towers, which hit theaters in 2002, is a good place to start the discussion. I was 16 years old when that film was released, and it made a huge impression on me. Of course, I'd read the books by then, but the art direction and visual aesthetic of Jackson's trilogy is what defined my own vision of what Middle-earth looked like. But I always have to remind myself, this is not canon. And we know what is canon because J.R.R. Tolkien himself drew a sketch of Helm's Deep. And guess what? Tolkien's sketch is much different from what we saw in theaters. Here is Tolkien's drawing. The Hornburg, the Deeping Wall, the Deeping Stream, they're all here, but notice how different it is from the film. The film version pushes the entire fortification into the back of a valley, literally nesting the Hornburg into the mountainside. But in Tolkien's description, the Hornburg juts out at the head of the valley, sitting atop a spur, guarding the gorge behind it. And strategically, that makes way more military sense, because it allows the fortress to project power across the entire plain, and it makes it harder to bottle up and bypass. I think it is an important point. If you're going to build a model of the Hornburg, what should that look like? Do you want to build Jackson's version or Tolkien's? Now, maybe it's because of my age, but the trilogy came out at a formative time in my childhood, so this version of the Hornburg is clearly going to be inspired by Peter Jackson. Well, technically, Alan Lee gets the credit. When Jackson hired him to work on art direction for the trilogy, the very first project he assigned Lee was, you guessed it, Helm's Deep. I decided not to scratch build the entire fortress. I cheated by 3D printing an STL file made by Dark Realms. This is his mountain fortress. It is a spitting image of Alan Lee's film version. So much so that a copyright claim forced Dark Realms to redesign the file. Well, let's just say the old version, the original one that he made, is still out there on the internet if you know where to look. And I do know where to look, so I found the original file and had it printed with a filament FDM printer. This is scaled to 15mm, even though our miniatures are 10, because I want the bases to fit comfortably on the ramparts of the wall. Next up, I start assembling and gluing together the printed sections. Here, we need to hit pause and talk about the first of many custom modifications. You see, the Hornburg itself is a little bit tight for gamers to fit their fat hands and miniatures inside the walls, so I decided to bump out the outer wall by 2 inches. Pulling that outer wall away opened up large gaps on the sides, and I had to fill that with polystyrene foam sections. I cut polystyrene insulation, I drew stonework onto it, textured it with a foil ball, and started filling in the gaps. I know that it looks a bit garish right now, but trust me, when this is painted, it will blend very nicely. Next, I want to talk about some changes I made to make the fortress a more sensible defensive position. Why does the ramp to the Hornburg not have a drawbridge? That's nonsensical, especially for a impregnable fortress. Second, why is the main gate to the Hornburg a single set of wooden doors? Where's the gatehouse? That's a massive weak point. Once you do get inside the Hornburg, heading up the outer courtyard, there is an archway that leads to the inner courtyard, with no door. You're telling me this doesn't even have a wooden barricade, much less a metal gate? Speaking of military folly, why was the Deeping Stream never widened or dammed to form a proper moat around the base of the Hornburg? Moats aren't exactly Numenorean-level technology. I could also complain at length about the pointless design of the Deeping Wall, but here we have to admit that is one of the few descriptions that Tolkien offers in his book. He describes it as a wide, thick wall, only 20 feet high, running from the Hornburg across the entire head of the valley. Tolkien also describes a sally port next to the main gate, and there's a funny scene in the movie where Aragorn tosses Gimli onto the ramp. You know, the ramp with no drawbridge. My model includes that sally port, but It's really a dumb spot for an exit. It's way too close to your main gate, and it's so precarious that defenders would never be able to sally out in any meaningful counterattack. Sally ports are, of course, a key element of real historical castles. So, while I'm going to include Tolkien's door, I'm taking the liberty to add a second, more practical exit over here. This hidden sally port will be at ground level, and it'll give the defenders an opportunity to slip out around the side of the Hornburg and surprise an attacking force on the flank. Okay, that's enough nitpicking from your resident castle architect. In addition to the new sally port, there are some other defensive upgrades I made that we'll talk about later in the video. For now, I have my fortress on a 2-inch thick sheet of polystyrene that I'm using as my base layer. It's 40 inches wide by 52 inches across because, well, that's what fits nicely in the back of my Jeep. And once the structure is glued down with liquid nails, it's time to start layering some topography. Immediately, you can see the channel that I have in mind for the Deeping stream, which will follow Tolkien's path of wrapping tightly around the base of the Hornburg. But you can also see that I've made a wide spillway. This is going to be a rocky washout area, because as a mountain watercourse, I can imagine, the Deeping stream would surge and overflow its banks during snow melts or heavy rains. In my version, the stream channel is widened as it passes under the culvert, and on the far side of the causeway ramp, you can see I'm going to insert a small stone dam. It'll have a short waterfall back down into the stream as it continues off table. On the opposite end of my board, you'll notice another defensive modification. My Deeping wall will end with a stone tower built up into the mountainside. Frankly, the entire wall should be studded with many more towers to create overlapping fields of fire, but both Lee and Tolkien depict the Deeping wall without many towers at all. I don't want to stray too far from their visuals, particularly Tolkien himself. So I'm just going to add one new tower to anchor the very end of the wall, and it'll provide the defenders a lookout bastion. And I've given it angled corners, like the other towers that Alan Lee designed in his version. So far, I've upgraded the defenses with a proper moat, another tower, and a second sally port. Now it's time to add a little bit of detail behind the Deeping wall on the back side of the Hornburg. I'm creating a rear lower level entry that's inspired by this sketch, which I absolutely love, done by Alan Lee. Adding this feature to my model will give the attackers another objective point. Objectives and scenario design were very much on my mind when I was building this model, because, let's face it, the battle at Helm's Deep is kind of a static and boring affair unless you give both sides more to do. And to me, that means more points of physical interest on the table. There are some fun surprises that I built inside the mountain, but I'll save that reveal till the very end of the video. For now, we need to finish roughing in the mountainside and preparing our papier-mâché mixture. I'm using newspaper strips and papier-mâché paste to cover up the polystyrene and blend it with the 3D printed model into the foam. When this is dry, I'll go back with gravel, pebbles, and little bits of foam to create boulders and rocky areas. I am paying particular attention to the base of the mountains, and to my washout area for the stream. All of this will be locked in and protected by mixing in Mod Podge with the first coat of paint, just to make sure that everything is hardened for durability. As I paint and dry brush the model with shades of gray, you can start to see how seamlessly all of the elements blend together. This is when you finally appreciate how cool this table is about to look in the end. Next up, it's resin time. I've stirred up a 2-part mixture, and I'm pouring liquid resin into the Deeping stream to create a very nice water look. 48 hours later, we're ready for flock, static grass, and bits of foliage. The 2 Towers was filmed in a New Zealand quarry, so it's very barren looking. I wanted my mountain valley to boast at least some vegetation. Alright, there are a few additional small details that are probably easy to miss on camera, so I want to show you up close on the model. My drawbridge at the causeway is fully functional, and I'm thinking about adding some little metal chains made of jewelry chain later. My portcullis and gates are also removable, so if the attacker breaks inside, you can pull them out. Of course, you can also pull out this section of the Deeping wall and replace it with these custom pieces I built from foam. That's an iconic moment in the film, and I think everyone expects to see it on the tabletop. Alright, now for the fun stuff. The defender has access to the rear of the castle, and from back here, you can see some of the caverns and the openings inside. There are several chambers inside the Hornburg, where I can hide flickering tea lights to provide ambient lighting. These rooms are big enough for units to fit inside, but let's be honest, if Saruman's army makes it this far, the game is definitely over. Click up top if you want to see us play the wargame on this custom table. Would you like to see more custom builds of famous Middle-earth locations? If so, let us know in the comments below.